Friday. That means it's time for your Friday real estate tip. I'm Donna Cardenas with the Barbara and Donna Realty Group out of Atlanta Communities, and this will be the 5th video in a 6-part series on selling your home. Today we'll be talking about the contract to closing phase, and if you have seen some of the other videos, we've talked about how to prepare your homes, the staging process, pricing and negotiating. And the last video will be about what to expect at the closing table. So I hope that you will come back and join us. And if you do like what you hear, please make sure you subscribe and like us and share the information. So stay tuned. Okay, welcome back. So you have successfully negotiated a contract and you are under contract. The next stage of the process will be the inspection and getting the loan done and everything that happens between this point and the closing table. So let's start with the inspection. I honestly don't remember if I mentioned this, but one thing when you are getting your home ready that you may possibly want to consider is having a pre-inspection yourself. And a reason for doing that is, especially if it's an older home, for me personally, I'd rather know up front what might come up on the inspection that the buyer does. That would enable me to take care of some of the things that I know most buyers are going to want to have taken care of, but also that kind of eliminates some of the surprises. Now, I will tell you that no two inspectors are going to come up with the exact same list of items needed, especially if there's not much needed. The inspectors, need to feel like they've earned their keep. So I jokingly have had an inspector say that they were just searching for things. I mean, they're not going to come up with bogus stuff, but if there's not too much on the list, then they'll come up with something. And the only reason I mention that is because, again, no two inspectors are going to have the same report. But if there are major things that are to be found, hopefully every inspector will come up with that, and that is what you're looking for in a pre-inspection. So by doing that, again, not only can you take care of some of those items up front, but if you choose not to, then you will need to price your house accordingly, such as roof, HVAC systems, things like that. So if you have not had the home pre-inspected, then going through this process may be a little bit nerve-wracking, especially waiting for that report to come in. But just know that depending upon who the buyer is and who their agent is in terms of skill set, they may come to you with a very lengthy list, or they may come to you with just a few items, but it is all about negotiating. So for the inspection process, they could come up with a list of 10 things, or rather the inspector may come up with a list of 10 things, and let's say that the buyer says, well, most of these things are very minor. I'm happy to take care of those things like caulking. Maybe a light bulb was burned out and you didn't know it, and the inspector wasn't 100% sure if that's what the problem was or if it was a light fixture issue, but nonetheless, that's really not a major issue. But let's say that you do have an older HVAC and the inspector has said that it is pretty much at the end of its life. So now it's up to you to decide how you want to handle that. From a seller standpoint, from a negotiating standpoint, you have some options. The buyer can really only ask you to repair it. They can't really ask you to do other things like money in exchange. But you as the seller can go back to the buyer and say, look, we really don't want to deal with all that. We don't want to, we don't have the time. We don't want to deal with the hassle of the repairs. We are willing to offer you money for those repairs. Now you can do that in a couple of different ways. You can have the buyer get a couple of estimates, and you can agree on a price, and you can, in some cases, you'll need to check with your lender, but in some cases, you can have that work done after closing and on the settlement statement, because you don't want to create loan fraud, mortgage fraud. But you can ask the lender if it's okay to put it on the HUD statement, on the settlement statement, that money is check is made out to the contractor and the repairs will be done after closing. Of course, there's a lot of agreement that has to go in that, but that is one way to handle it. The other way to handle it is to offer that same amount of money in the form of additional closing costs, fees like that will be paid at closing, or simply reduce the price. It all revolves around negotiating depending upon what you're willing to offer and what the buyer is willing to accept. I will tell you, from a buyer standpoint, there are usually a couple of things that I counsel my buyers not to let go. One is things that are structural, and the other is anything having to do with water damage, because you really never know what you're getting into until you start the work. And if you've already closed, then you're kind of out of luck in terms of how you can go back to what you can go back to the seller for. So from a seller standpoint, just be aware of that if the buyer's agent is savvy, then they're probably going to ask that those items be done up front, or that some sort of reasonable agreement is reached regarding that. During this contract to close phase, the other things that you're going to be looking out for is the appraisal process. The buyer may also ask that a survey be done. In their contract, they may have asked you to provide a termite letter, and if you do not have a termite bond in place, then this will be the time for you to do it. Actually, I take that back. You will want to do your termite letter after you have negotiated the inspection, because if things don't work out, you don't want to go through that process. And if you do have termites, in order to provide a clear letter at closing, you're going to have to do the treatment, and that clear letter is only good for 30 days, and so you will want to wait until you know that you are closing within 30 days. And the other part of this process is having your agent stay on top of the loan and making sure that they're checking up on the loan process and make sure that it's moving along. Once your inspection has been negotiated, then the closing attorney is going to also order title, and that is where the buyer will find out if there's any encumbrances. Now, what I mean by that is it's not necessarily all about other parties that own the property that may not have been part of the contract, and surprise. But there may also be encumbrances on the property, such as easements, liens. Maybe there's been work done on the property and the workers were not all paid, and they have put a lien on the property, and title cannot transfer with that attached to a property. You may also find encroachments if your neighbor's fence has been built on your property because they didn't have a survey done, or maybe driveway is extended over in your property, or the other way around, your driveway is on someone else's properties. These are reasons, by the way, as a buyer, that you always want to have a survey done. Used to, the lenders would require it, but they don't anymore in most cases. And I used to always 100% recommend it on properties that were in town where the lines were really kind of willy-nilly and all over the place. And out in the suburbs where the lines looked a little bit clearer, then I certainly always recommended it, but didn't make, I guess you could say, that much of an issue about it if the buyer chose not to do it. But in recent years, it has become very apparent that you really should have a survey done on every single piece of property that you buy because of these encumbrances and encroachments with the sewer lines running through underneath the property and driveways not being where they should. And in some cases, I've seen where the house is actually not even on the piece of property that you're buying. So with that being said, definitely want to make sure that as a buyer that you're having a survey done. Now, again, as the seller, this is just one of the things that may be done, and if there is an issue that comes up, it's just part of what the negotiations are about. And if it's a big issue, then you're going to have to negotiate it, because if this deal goes away, your next transaction, your next buyer is going to be asking for the same thing. If it's something major, you're not going to be able to close with it like that anyway. So you've negotiated the inspection. you have dealt with a survey issue, if there's anything that came up with that. The appraisal is now going to be ordered, and hopefully you've done right on the pricing, and so there's not going to be an issue with the appraisal. And if you have a good agent, your agent, the seller's agent, is going to be present at that appraisal when the appraiser comes to the property. And the appraisers will not talk to agents, but the agent, a good listing agent, can certainly provide the information on how they came up with their number. Basically, any help that they can offer that appraiser will accept will help you. If y'all did a good job on the pricing and got the money, then you're going to want to make sure that it does appraise out. Now, all of that's been done, so now you're going to go ahead and order your termite letter, and hopefully there's no termites, so you're just asking for a clear letter. And now you're just waiting on the loan process. And at this point, if the lender has done a good job and gotten everything up front, then it will be submitted to underwriting, and that's where the underwriter looks at everything and makes sure that all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, and that the buyer has been truthful on all of their paperwork. And then you're just sitting there waiting to close. Typical closing time frames from the time that you go under contract to closing date is about 30 to 45 days maximum. Any more than 60, then you start getting into other issues, such as the lender will not allow rent back. The buyer will have to pay more to lock in their rate if they want to. So that's why I say typically you're looking about 30 to 45 days from contract to close. So hopefully that has been helpful information. And again, if you like what you've heard, please like us and share our information and subscribe to us so that you're notified when the next video pops up. And we look forward to seeing you on the next video, where we will talk about everything that happens at the closing table and make sure that you get there. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week.